Welcome, everyone. Today is a special day. We are here for John Albright's celebration of life service. I'm Reverend Liz Luoma, spiritual leader at Unity of Fort Collins, Colorado. And even though my time here has not been very long, arrived here with Davine in the end of December, it has been my privilege and honor, as well as Davine's, to have met John, to have spent some time with John and Judy, and to also be with John and Judy and their family during the time where John made his transition and passed from this life over the veil into the next eternal life. We are so very grateful for your presence with us today. We are so grateful for the opportunity to have Zoom as our technology to be able to meet together. Give a special thank you to Franklin Taggart for his technical expertise in helping to make this all possible. I know this is a very unique way to do a celebration of life. However, it has saved you the need to travel or to meet. So, there are some blessings in this way of being able to come together to celebrate John and his life. I'd like to welcome all of John's family and friends, as well as everyone who is able to be present with us today. We also want to acknowledge any of the family and friends who couldn't be with us. However, the great news is that this celebration of life is being recorded and will be uploaded onto the Unity Church YouTube channel. That's Unity Church of Fort Collins YouTube channel. And there is also a website that you can go to, and it's celebrating johnalbright.blogspot.com. So let us just take a breath in together, knowing that today we're coming together to both remember and to celebrate the precious, amazing life of John Albright as we knew him during his time here in physical form. Now, it may seem strange to celebrate while we're also in a time of grieving. However, celebrating John's life is really our time to appreciate everything that he contributed to our lives and to the lives of our world and to everyone who's known him. In the midst of our sadness and our missing John, which is natural and of course going to be part of the process, the memories of him also give us the opportunity to experience all the love and joy that he brought and that he continues to bring through our precious memories of him. Funerals and memorials enable us to share our memories and to express our gratitude to those that we have loved and who have loved us, as John has. Each person who's ever lived has changed the life of others and added to the rich kaleidoscope of our world. John certainly touched and contributed to so many of our lives, possibly in ways that he never even knew that he did. And so now to begin, I'm inviting you, each in your own way and according to your own faith, to join with me in this prayer of centering. So taking a breath in, and we let it go. Taking another deep breath in, and we let it go. And as we focus on our breath, we recognize that this breath is divine spirit. The divine spirit of life is breathing us now. It is present everywhere, in everything, and everyone. We recognize that this divine breath is the presence and the power of divine love, or that which we call God or the divine spirit. We understand that this infinite love surrounds us, indwells us, and unites us all in this moment. In this pure light and love, we understand that life is an eternal adventure, unfolding greater, more expansive experiences before us, here and on the other side of the veil. Jesus, who was the great example of God's love, said, I have come that they might have life and have it more abundantly, and that we might understand that life is forever. And so we, in love and faith, believing that death is only horizon, another phase in this circle of eternal life, we give thanks, knowing that John is now experiencing this life just on the other side of the veil. And from Kehil Gibran, he says, for that it is to die, but to what is it what is it to die, but to stand naked in the wind and melt into the sun? And what is it to cease breathing, but to free the breath from its restless tides, that it may rise and expand and seek God uncumbered? Only when you drink from the river of silence shall you indeed sing. And when you have reached the mountain top, then you shall begin to climb. And when the earth shall claim your limbs, then you truly shall dance. And now we turn our thoughts to realizing that John's spirit is ever alive, released into a new expression, now living his new experience, soaring unencumbered by the dreadful disease that crippled his body and finally claimed him. And so we just breathe that in. Now we're going to invite Reverend Julie Legg to share John's obituary and learn more about all the things that some of the great things he was about. And so, Julie, we thank you.
Thank you. On March 2nd, 2020, John Albright passed peacefully from this life. His body was no match for the ALS that devastated him. John was a person who found joy in many things. He was an outdoorsman, an avid hunter and fisherman. One of his greatest pleasures was hunting antelope with friends and family on the plains of northern Colorado and southern Wyoming. He loved art, particularly that of the American Southwest, and always looked forward to trips to Santa Fe with his wife, Judy, where he loved to roam through galleries, talk to local artists, and indulge himself in the local cuisine. Chile rellenos, tamales, and pozole were among his favorite foods. John also was an enthusiast of opera and classical music, about which he possessed an extensive knowledge. John always loved animals and found himself particularly enamored of cats after he was assigned to work with them as a volunteer at the Larimer Humane Society. At home, he would walk Callie, the family cat, on a leash around the neighborhood. To the great amusement of the neighbors, people would pass by and take pictures of the two of them. The son of Arthur and Jessie Albright, John was born in 1937 in Panama, where his father was employed on the Panama Canal. Growing up in the canal zone, he never owned a coat or saw snow until he was 18 and came to the States to attend college at Oklahoma State University, then known as Oklahoma A&M. He majored in history. Upon his graduation from OSU in 1959, he married his first wife, Carol, with whom he raised 4 children. After completing graduate work at OSU, he entered the military as an officer with the 11th Armored Cavalry that patrolled the Iron Curtain in Germany during the Cold War. At the end of his tour in Germany, he returned to the States and became a museum curator at the Woolaroc Museum near Tulsa, Oklahoma, where he enjoyed working among the works of many of the great artists of the American West. In 1966, John was recalled to active duty and rejoined the 11th Armored Cavalry before being deployed to Vietnam. When his tour as a soldier was over, he was hired as an historian by the Office of the Chief of Military History in Washington, D.C. As a civilian, he was sent to Vietnam 3 more times to train military history detachments on how to record the war. After hearing an announcement on the radio in Washington, D.C., that a portion of the National Park Service was being moved to Denver, Colorado, he jumped at the opportunity and joined the NPS in 1972 and moved with them. He had a long and satisfying career with the Park Service, both in the regional office and the Denver Service Center, where he was project manager for a number of historic preservation and park development projects in eastern states. He was also a periodic instructor at the NPS Training Center in the Grand Canyon. In 1978, he began teaching an historic preservation graduate seminar at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and later at Colorado State University, where he joined the faculty full-time in 1992. Always wanting to be of service and make a difference in the world, John volunteered in many sectors throughout the year. He served on the Governor's Board for Historic Preservation, the State Historical Fund Advising Committee, and the Landmark Preservation Commission in Fort Collins. He was a volunteer at the Larimer Humane Society for 6 years, and for 4 years was the civilian member of the Animal Use and Care Committee of the National Wildlife Research Center. He is survived by Judith, his wife of 40 years, his brother Alan and wife Marianne, his sons Bruce and wife Jennifer, Martin and wife Liz, and Don, and a daughter, Mary Verity, and husband Bill. John is also survived by 2 stepchildren, Carolyn Landron and Stephanie Wolf, and husband Chris of Denver, as well as grandchildren Rachel, Sean, Avery, Hudson, and step-grandchildren Allie and Andrew. Not least, he leaves his 2 beloved cats, Hazel and Holly, who have added humor and great joy to his life, as John has added humor and great joy to our lives.
Thank you, Julie. I so appreciate that. And I also appreciate Judy for putting that obituary together. That's just a snippet of John's life, but what an outstanding man, and we could just hear that. And thank you, Julie, for bringing that. And so Davine is now going to share one of John's favorite scripture readings and another poem as well. Davine.
In my house are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you, for I go to prepare a place for you. And that's John 14:2. The reading that I'm going to do is called Peace Be Unto Thee, Stranger by Ernest Holmes. Peace be unto thee, stranger, enter and be not afraid. I have left the gate opened, and thou art welcome to my home. There is a room in my house for all. I have swept the hearth and lighted the fire. The room is warm and cheerful, and you will find comfort and rest within. The table is laid, and the fruits of life are spread before thee. The wine is here also. It sparkles in the light. I have set a chair for you where the sunbeams dance through the shade. Sit and rest and refresh your soul. Eat of the fruit and drink the wine. All is yours, and you are welcome.
Thank you, Davine. And I know that that was another one of John's favorite readings that Judy brought to us, and make sure that we brought those words, because they speak to our heart, and they speak to all of us, I believe. So at this time, we are going to have some shared remembrances, a short film clip that Franklin will be showing us, as well as a slideshow with some music and a meditation. So I'm turning it over to Franklin and keeping our hearts open for the next.
Oh boy, I wanted to talk a little bit about my buddy John Albright. And so what I came up with was that he and Judy have been for the last 10 or 12 years like a big brother and a sister to me. And we would talk about, the three of us would talk about how we were chosen family. And John was definitely somebody that I looked up to in so many ways. Every spring, usually in about April, he and I would, either he would see the first osprey on a nest on Prospect Avenue or by River Ponds, or I would, and we'd both get a little bit excited about that, about another spring coming around. But I'd kid him. I'd say, I used to say that I'd give him or ask him a question about something in history, and not only would he know it, he would tell me a story. He would bring it to life. And all the years that I knew John, I thought, God, I wish I had had a history teacher like him back when I was a kid, because I used to hate history. It made no sense to me, and there was no relevance. But with John, he made it real, and he loved doing that. He also had a dry sense of humor, and he and I saw humor in a lot of similar things in that, and we would joke with each other about that. I think I mentioned already that he was somebody that I really looked up to, and I know he was very active in historic preservation here in Larimer County. And over the years that I knew him, I also knew that he had volunteered at the Humane Society. He would tell me stories about that. I know he worked with the National Park Service for years, and I would goof up and call it the Forest Service, and he would always correct me, always tell me it was the Park Service, not the Forest Service, and that I was going to get in trouble someday if I said that to the wrong person. His service in Vietnam, one of the last times that I spent with John before he died, was he showed another friend, Maury, and I, a slide carousel of pictures that he had taken in Vietnam, and he had them all put together on a carousel. And I think this was he gave us pretty much a lecture like he had when he was teaching Vietnam history at CSU. Another thing that really sticks in my mind too was what a good-hearted man he was. He was such a lover of animals, and especially cats. And I remember when I moved, about 10 years ago, I needed to find a home for a cat, Blue Bear, and Judy and John took Blue Bear and had him for a couple of years, and they just loved him. And then Blue got sick, and John took him in to have him put to sleep. And I remember it just broke John's heart to have to put Blue to sleep. And then I found a stray cat for him that turned out to be ill also, and they had Callie for 3 or 4 years, and then she also had to be euthanized. And I remember John that evening when he came home, I went over to just see how he was doing, and he said, God, it just breaks his heart when he has to take the cats in and have them put to sleep like that. So my God, what a really good-hearted man and a brilliant man, and just a teacher and a friend and a companion on this, on the last 10 or 12 years of my walk through life. The last thing I was going to say is just that I was present when John took his own life. He used the Death with Dignity bill and was able to make a decision on a date. And John was surrounded by family and friends, all of us that loved him. And I sat there just thinking about how blessed I was to have had John Albright in my life for the time that I had. And I'll remember him as long as I live. And I could go on probably for another 45 minutes. I got all kinds of notes, but I put those down. I shared what I really wanted to say. And there's so many things about John that I'm going to miss, but more than anything else, I'm just feeling so blessed that I had this wonderful man and friend for all the years that I did. So that's it. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Maury Miller. I need to start off by saying I am an actual person. I'm not John's imaginary friend, which that's going to make sense here in a minute. I met John in 1992 as a freshman at CSU. He helped get my first load of classes in and locked down when my normal advisor was not available. I ended up taking several of his classes over the years. We ended up talking. We talk outside of class. I was working as a police officer at the time, and I would see John coming across the plaza with his cup of hot tea, wearing his hat with his Vietnam veteran pin on, and he was always insistent that I not leave CSU for another law enforcement job until I finished my degree. I did finish my degree. I ended up going to work for the Larimer County Coroner's Office. While there, as a thank you, I ended up making John a hunting knife and taking it up and giving it to him at his office. He wrote me a very nice letter afterwards thanking me for that. A short while later, I reconnected with John again after the death of one of his friends, and he made the comment that he had lost his antelope hunting partner and his fly fishing buddy. It wasn't too long ago, long after that I drew my first antelope tag, and John and I hunted ever since together. That was, I believe, 2003. For many years, John and I would hunt together, and he would tell his sons about this guy Maury that he was going hunting with, and Maury got this deer, and Maury took me, and I got this doe antelope. And for the longest time, Bruce and Martin just thought that their dad had an imaginary playmate. That continued until I finally got to meet both boys, got to hunt with John and Bruce at one point. Over the years, John became more than a friend to me. He was a mentor. He was a confidant. He was a swift kick in the backside when I needed it while going through my divorce. He told me I was going to be okay. He told me how bad it had to hurt and that he understood that, but that I was going to be okay. And I believed him, ironically. He always wanted to know how the kids were doing. If there was a hunt that I was on that he wasn't able to go to, he wanted to know all the details, how far the shot was, where we were, how it happened, how things came together. Last summer when John started to decline and we kind of realized what was going on and the diagnosis came down, I was fortunate that I typically had at least one day off in the middle of the week, and typically that was Friday. So given his diagnosis of ALS, instead of Tuesdays with Maury, we had Fridays with John. We would go get a bite to eat. We'd stop and get a cup of hot tea. We'd go run errands. We'd just spend time and talk. And I have thoroughly missed my Fridays with John over the last 3 months. I got to engage in the gaffers group and sit and listen to stories and laugh and joke with some extremely magnificent human beings because of John. John poured into me by pouring into my family. He absolutely adored my daughter Eva and would always sing her praises on what a great kid she was. I'm going to miss John this fall. When I get up the mountain or I get out on the prairie, I've been honored to have him in my life. It's going to be a big void this fall, and I hope to fill it with taking some folks who have never hunted before, hunting, because he would get a kick out of that. Through all of this, his big worry was leaving people. He was ready to go when he went, but he was worried about Judy. That has been his biggest stressor through all that, through our conversations. As things came to an end, we had frank conversations, and it brought peace just knowing where he was at with things. When I get up there this fall with John's rifle, it isn't going to be the same. But there are many times when we would be coming home from a successful, unsuccessful trip where the back of the truck was empty and no shot was fired and no shell was chambered, that John would say that at least it's better than working at the shoe department of the Logan Valley Mall in Altoona, Pennsylvania. And that's what it's going to be this fall. Thanks, folks.
John and Judy Albright were delightful close friends of my husband, Dave McComb, and me. We spent many happy hours at dinner with lots of laughter and talk. John loved songs and singing, and I used to find old paperback songbooks for him from the 50s and before, and he would flip through them happily, singing snatches of songs from every one. I think he knew practically every song ever written and its history. Once Dave heard of a song that Dave, thought was obscure. He heard it mentioned in a Tuna, Texas dramatic production. "John," Dave said, "do you know Bright in the Corner Where You Are?" John immediately burst into song and sang every verse with chorus. John was a wonderful storyteller. He was from the far, far, far south. He was born in the Panama Canal Zone, and he had a remarkable sense of humor and storytelling. One story that I loved involved an Episcopal church that he attended when he lived in Virginia many years ago. John was a historian and on the church vestry or church council and very influential. The church had also had a parishioner named G. Washington, and Mr. G. Washington, a man of faith, also a vestryman, but somewhat earlier than John, had left his personal Bible to the church. The George Washington Bible had safely been in a safety deposit box out of sight for many, many years. John, always lobbying in the interests of history and historical research, felt that the George Washington Bible should be displayed in the Smithsonian. But, alas, other vestrymen were horrified and firmly decided that the George Washington Bible should continue to live in a respectable bank, in a respectable safety deposit box, safely away from prying historical eyes. John lost that battle, but he won another. This particular historic church also had a historic table and some sort of historic meeting room, and the table impeded common foot traffic and was a general awkward hazard and nuisance. John proposed several times and with great persuasion that the table be moved out of the traffic pattern. But again, and alas, each time John presented the move, the vestry decided that the sacred table was in a sacred spot and that it should not be moved. John cheerfully dropped his campaign, But every time he and a friend were alone in the vestry room, the table mysteriously moved slightly, ever so slightly, toward the proposed by John location, and after a long time, the table, mysteriously of course, had removed itself to a new location, and no one noticed at all. According to John, tables do that sometime. We miss you, John. You with your laughter and your songs and your stories and your charm and your humor.
I first met John Albright in August of 1999, having moved from Turkey to Fort Collins. John invited me over to his home to meet his wife, Judy. When I arrived at the house on Dogwood, above the doorbell was a sign that said, "On this site in 1870, nothing happened." This was a clear sign of John's sense of humor. We all became quick friends and spent many hours together, including making meals together on all of holidays. John was really proud of his hometown, the Panama Canal Zone, and was really quite angry with Jimmy Carter, which he often said, "Jimmy Carter gave away my hometown, that SOB," as you could imagine. One of the things about John was that he loved his family. He often talked about his son, Bruce, Mary, and Don. And John would be what we would now know in literature as the trickster. And if you can imagine this, John at one point had a VW van. And John told me the time that he had the kids in the van and they were driving about town, and he said, "Do you see those radio towers up on the hill?" And he said, if you squint really hard, you could see the radio waves. Well, the kids were all excited about whether they could actually see these radio waves. And they squinted and said, "We can't see them." And he said, "No, you're just not trying hard enough." And they squinted and squinted till finally Mary, catching on to the whole thing, said, I can see it, and which drove Bruce and Martin out of their minds, because the more they squinted, the less they could see anything. So John had many signature pieces. We all remember John for his aviator glasses, his bolo ties, his Vietnam service bars on his lapel, and his black boots. Now, one day he said, "Come on over, we'll go out and get something to eat." And it was a really hot July day. When we were about ready to go, John started to put on some black boots. And I said, "John, it's so hot out. Are you sure you don't want to put on some sandals in this heat?" And he looked at me in all seriousness and said, "Sandals are for hippies and Jesus," which meant there was not a chance he was ever going to take those boots off. Now, John also loved all types of music. Having grown up in Panama, he loved music in Spanish. One time I went to the house, I found John and Judy listening to some Mexican music. Having grown up in that community, I knew that when that music played, the beer bottles would start flying, as would the punches. I was absolutely horrified at this and said, "What are you doing playing this music?" And he looked at me and said, "Well, why not?" When I recounted this story to Martin, Martin gave me that panic and said, "Oh my God, is my dad playing that marimba music again?" John also served in the armed forces, serving in the U.S. Army, and spent time in Germany as a member of the cavalry. During his time in Vietnam, he would send home tapes, reel-to-reel tapes, for his family to hear. This in turn got Mary a trip to the principal's office for using salty language, which she had learned from John on the tapes. Later on, John reflected upon his life and his kids, and which he treasured greatly. He loved his time with Bruce and Martin, fishing and hunting, and said that, his guns, it meant a great deal to John to give the guns to Martin and to Bruce, as well as the fishing gear, as a remembrance of their time together. But John looked at me in all seriousness and said, "I just don't know what I'll give Mary. She means so much to me, and a lamp just isn't going to do it." Now, as many of you know, when calling John, he would answer the phone and you'd say, "John, how are you?" And he would answer, "Better than a kick in the head." So, as you can imagine, the day came that John, not knowing what to give Mary, one day said to me, I found a box that belonged to my mother. I want to make sure that I give it to Mary. When they arrived at the house, John made sure to say to Mary, would you like this item from Grandma? Mary lit up and was more than pleased, which made John happy. He seeming to think that this was much better than giving her a lamp. And John was always very supportive of my choices and was always willing to lend a hand. The opportunity came for me to move back to Turkey. John was more than happy to take me to the airport. He helped me with my luggage. He walked me into the terminal, helped me deposit everything. And he said, we've had a good time, all of us. He remembered all the meals we had made together, all the friends that had shared those meals with us at their house. And he started to tear up a bit. He turned on his heels and said, I'm going to miss you, kid, and quickly walked away before I could see him cry. I came back to Fort Collins recently to see John before he left us. And all I can think of is, sir, I'm going to miss you too.
Hello, John. This is Mel Wright and Carol Wright. We, like hundreds of others, were lucky enough to call you a friend. Too often, when death of a wonderful person such as yours occurs, we find ourselves wishing that we had known and interacted more with this person. That is where we find ourselves. You and Judy were our first friends in Clydesdale Park even before we officially moved here. We attended a Clydesdale community dinner after signing to have our house built. And in one night of a Clydesdale Park community dinner, we fell in love with this community and made new friends that night. John and Judy invited us to see your home, which is the same model as ours. You pointed out a number of interior things we should change and made a huge difference in the feel of our home. You hooked us up with Ted, who turned out to be a master builder and a landscape genius. You have no idea how many times we look back at that dinner and are so thankful for your friendship and your advice. John, I was amazed at how many ways our experiences and lives connected, such as service in Vietnam, Guam's infamous brown snakes, and the Indian Wars in Kansas and Colorado. What are the odds of making friends with a person who knew more details about my family's histories and my great-great aunt Susanna Alder's capture in Kansas by the Cheyenne dog soldiers and her subsequent death by Chief Blackkettle's wife during the 7th Cavalry rescue attempt here in Silver Springs, Colorado. I'd love to have taken your history courses at CSU, which I hear you delivered with that infamous wry sense of humor of yours. I'm very sure many of those students have heard of your passing and smiled at the memories while a few tears well up in their eyes. John, your sense of humor, no matter the subject, somewhere, somehow you slipped in a sleeper joke or ended with a funny exclamation. In every conversation I've found with you, I would be chuckling at your phraseology. You were truly one of those people that was a joy to be around, to chat with, or just listen to. While nothing of a historical note happened at your home's location in 1867, per your bronze plaque by the door, I think everyone in Clydesdale Park who had the pleasure of knowing and talking to you would agree that a new sign needs to be placed at your entrance. I'm not a wordsmith, so I have no idea how to state it, but I'm sure something of the order of, if you were to write it, it might say, hey, COVID-19 in the year 2020, I skipped your craziness, signed John. But more fitting might be something like, a man and a husband of honor and bravery and dignity lived and died here. He shall be remembered as such by all who knew him. Mel and Carol, hope you're doing well up there. Take care.
Max, what are you doing back already? And why are you bringing in that box of old clothes? You're supposed to give them to the thrift store.
Yes, I know, but something happened.
What do you mean something happened? Are you all right? Did you fall on the ice?
No, yes, I'm fine, I'm fine.
Well, here, put that box down. What happened?
Well, As I was crossing the railroad tracks, I looked to my right. And on the tracks, actually stuck to the tracks, it looked like I saw something moving. So I pulled over and got out to sea.
You got out in this cold and snow and went over to the railroad tracks? You could have fallen or been killed by a train. What on earth were you thinking? Curiosity killed the cat, you say.
Curiosity saved the cat this time.
What are you talking about? You're not making any sense. Are you sure you didn't fall and hit your head?
Yes, I'm sure. So I saw a small animal with its paws stuck to the frozen metal train track. You know, like somehow your tongue freezes to an ice cream bar.
Max, what's in the box?
And I got my coffee from the car, and I poured it on the track where the kitten's little paws were frozen to it.
You brought home a kitten?
And that's how curiosity saved the cat. Pretty smart of me, eh? With the coffee?
Yes, but you brought it home? We can't keep it.
Why not?
Why not? Because we agreed that when Shadow died, we wouldn't get another cat. What happens when this one dies? Max, I can't take another loss like that. Oh, no, no, no.
Well, at this point, the cat could outlive us.
Oh, thanks a lot. And then just who would take care of it? No, it doesn't belong here.
Why not, Sharon? Why can't it belong here? Aren't old people worthy of love too, as long as we live?
We have enough love. We don't need any more.
Speak for yourself, my dear. I don't want to give the cat love a limit. Besides, remember how nice it is having a small, warm, furry creature around to take care of? Remember how wonderful a cat's purr is?
Oh, it's probably sick. And it's definitely going to need shots. We can't afford vet bills, especially when one of our apartments is still vacant. It can't stay. For Pete's sake, take it to a shelter.
And I do it in the morning. It's getting late, and I don't know where an animal shelter is.
So what do we feed it? Where will it go potty? And you are not using my dishpan as a cat box.
No, of course not. I picked up a few things on my way home. They're still out front. I'll be right back, and I made an appointment for tomorrow with Shadow's old vet.
in my memories of Dad, of John, probably the two things that that I treasure the most are the things that he passed on to me. I think the most important of those were a love of learning, a love of knowledge, and a willingness to keep one's mind open to any kind of learning, to any kind of knowledge. And I think the other thing is his integrity. One of the stories I remember from when I was a kid, probably not more than 11 or 12, I remember Dad had started working for the Park Service in 1972, and he loved the national parks and he loved the public lands, and he thought the national parks were amazing treasures. So he tried to take us to national parks whenever we went on family vacations. We always tried to go to the national parks. And I remember Dad did not like the idea that national parks were starting to charge people to get in. That was a program that they just started, I think, in the late 1960s or early 1970s. They started charging people to get in. And I remember we were in line to get into a national park, and I think it was probably Mesa Verde. And I remember saying to him, well, Dad, you work for the Park Service. Why don't you just show your ID and we can get in for free? And I remember Dad didn't get upset. He didn't get angry. He just thought a minute and he said, son, all of these people around us have to pay to get into the national parks. If they have to pay to get in, we should have to pay to get in too. And I think it was a relatively small thing at the time, but what it showed me was that integrity comes not just in the big major things, but integrity and character can also be shown in very small ways. And I think that both of those are both his integrity and his love of learning and his appreciation and respect for knowledge were the most valuable things that he ever gave to me. And those are things that I treasure to this day, and that I hope will be passed on to everyone in the family, because I think they were truly the greatest gifts that Dad could ever have given us. And we'll miss him.
My name is Jackie Powell, and I worked with John at the National Park Service from 1974 until he left for CSU. We remained good friends over the years after that. He was like a big brother to me, teaching me, for instance, how org charts don't always reflect the true organization. He guided the paperwork through to convert my position from temporary to permanent, for which I am forever grateful. In the mid-70s, when he was working on a project on Grant Coors Ranch in Montana, he would pop out of his office to share a fascinating tidbit or two he had found. I appreciated Grant Coors deeply when I finally visited the ranch, mostly because of John's backstory tales. Over the years, I also appreciated John's reminiscence of his time at the Park Service and his bottomless store of wacky jokes. Safe travels, John.
I was so sorry to learn of John's passing, but I've truly enjoyed reflecting on our early years together. My condolences to his wife and children. On July 5th, 1973, I first walked into the National Park Service Historic Preservation Team office, then temporarily installed in a huge open bay above JoEllen's department store in the old Villa Italian Mall in Lakewood. Among the first person I met was John Albright, an outgoing and sprightly historian, himself fairly recently joined with the NPS Historic Preservation Team, which had transferred from Washington, D.C. and was headed by then veteran and venerable historian Merrill J. Mattis. John fast became a colleague and remained so for several years. I was immediately struck by his knowledge of the federal system, so to speak, his friendliness and his loquaciousness. He was instantly helpful as I settled into the program, which at that time focused on the American bicentennial and those National Park Service parks that directly related to that history. I must say that I was amazed at John's helpfulness, his good humor, and his friendship, along with that of others in our cadre. As I recall, he invited me to lunch there in the mall, as well as to dinner at his home with his family. John had been in federal service for quite a number of years even then, and his knowledge of how to function in that bureaucracy proved of immediate help to me. Suffice it to say that I probably battered him with myriad questions and concerns as I began my own tenure as a public historian. Our job in those early days was to research and write history studies targeting the role of given parks focused on aspects of the colonial period and the American Revolution. And John was a ready fount of knowledge and proved an able consultant and aid for our initial work. Our jobs took us all over the country, and at this time particularly to parks and various state, federal, and private repositories in the East, where we mined for data to complete our reports on aspects of the Revolutionary War. These assignments were later expanded all across the country following the bicentennial. In later years, following that focus, our projects became more diversified, and eventually our core team was split up, its members assigned among the several regional planning branches. Over the years, our relationships changed somewhat. John, as I recall, properly changed his focus to management in the reorganized Denver Service Center, and we did not work together as closely as before. I stayed in history, and John and several others became successful managers on other teams, so I did not see him as much during the years preceding his retirement. My best thoughts of John were always of his thoughtful advice and considerate help when I was a novice historian on the historic preservation team. I relished his good humor, his wit, his intelligence, and his readiness to help me with questions and concerns during my transitional months in 1973 and 1974. Years later, following his retirement, John called on me once or twice to speak to his classes at Colorado State University in Fort Collins, and we had a chance to catch up with each other's activities. I always admired him for staying in touch. I last saw him at a luncheon a few years back. I'll miss him greatly, and I'll remember him as an early, thoughtful friend during my rookie season, so to speak. I'm saddened by his loss, but I'll cherish his memory forever. Thank you.
John Albright was to me the most generous, loyal, supportive, patriotic, and get-it-done man I've ever known. I have a million vignette memories of him, including his always impeccable appearance. For a number of years, John invited me to lecture to his history class at CSU. I lectured on the interpretation of history. He usually drove me up there to Fort Collins. We had long talks about his childhood in Panama, his military service, his teen years, and his children. It was during that time that he gave me some instructions about how to clean my glasses and that I might need a manicure. He was always wanted the best for all of his friends. And I took these suggestions as examples of the wide range of his interest and good wishes for everyone. He was also dedicated to the National Park Service. We worked on the same Northeast team at the service center here in Denver, and where we provided professional service to national parks in the eastern part of the United States. He was an exceptionally good project manager and a considerable help to me in developing my management skills. Also during this time, he took a great deal of interest in developing a possible new national park encompassing a number of important historic sites in western Pennsylvania. It was also during this time that he became interested in the arts and crafts movement of the earliest 20th century, leading to a scholarly study of Marie Zimmerman, one of its best-known artists, and also to John's becoming a collector of stretch glass, a style of glass associated with the arts and crafts movement. And this became an enthusiasm he shared with his cherished wife. John was a memorable person and one who made a great deal of difference in my life. I will remember him always with the fondest warmth.
My name is Craig Seller, and I knew John during his years with the National Park Service. In 1978, the National Park Service transferred me to the Denver Service Center, the office that does the planning, design, and construction for all of the parks in the National Park system. I met John shortly thereafter. We ended up together in a planning division for the eastern portion of the country. I swear I knew John knew everything. Anytime I had a question about a park, the politics of the National Park Service, or who someone was, or who to contact for information, John knew. Each morning, a number of us would gather before the office opened and talk. Sometimes it was silly stuff, sometimes it was projects, and sometimes it was just office politics. But it cemented our friendship. It wasn't long before John, Nan Rickey, Jackie Powell, and I were going to lunch. We all loved Mexican food, and I swear we must have gone to every Mexican restaurant in Lakewood. Nan came up with a journal, and we each provided funny critiques for the restaurants we ate out. What good times we had. I still have that book. John would regale us with stories from his childhood growing up in the Panama Canal Zone, his tours of duty as a military historian in Vietnam, his time working at the Gilcrease Museum, and his current work with the National Park Service. He was a good storyteller. After John retired, I tried to keep up the contact. Occasionally, John would come to Denver, and Nan and Jackie and Jerry Green and I would all get together for lunch and reminisce. No one could reminisce like John. I will miss John. He was one of a kind.
We've received a few written tributes for John. I'll read some of them for you now. This is from his friend Bill Griswold. I've been thinking about how much my life and after my service at CSU was affected by you, particularly in the years after you came to us full-time, 20 or so years ago, if my memory is right. My first memory is the time another faculty member, Diane Margolf, and I shared a ride with you and a group of students to a historic spot in Wyoming, Fort Bridger, as I recall. What marvels you related as we drove that morning, what amazing knowledge you had of the various issues that a simple place out in the wilderness could hold for us. Then there were times daily when I would arrive at the Clark building to prepare my 8 o'clock Western Civ lecture, assuming that I was the first to be there, and your voice would come from down the hall. Good morning, Professor Griswold, knowing full well that you had been there at least 15 minutes before me. I began to believe you slept in your office. When I joined the Gaffers, you began to drop by every Friday morning at 10:45 to pick me up. And then we would begin talking. How many times I was dumbfounded by your knowledge of music. I had sung some Mozart and Beethoven portions, and even the entire Brahms Requiem, but you had not stopped with a few sections. You could recall the tenor part of many of the major choral masters, Verdi, Mozart, Beethoven, others. And as we spoke, you were singing a major part in a local barbershop quartet every week or so. And there was always more, not only how to shoot a rifle, but how to sight the rifle, how to carry the animal out of the forest to the car, how to take the dead deer to the person who cut it all up, and on and on and on. Alas, as we drove this story, occasionally became more personal, and I would realize how there were times when your service in Vietnam had been very difficult and dangerous. I remember, too, how sad it was in civilian life to raise a child who could not lead a normal life, and how for some time you had worked to help children who had been badly treated in their early times. When I was in college, I learned of the Uomo Universal, the Renaissance term for a universal man. Of all of my many friends, John, you are certainly among the first on my list of universal men. Thanks for sharing some of that life with me. This is a remembrance from Bill Whitmer, John's colleague at the National Park Service. John first came up in discussion with my roommate Robert Felker when I joined the National Park Service in July 1973. Bob and John worked on common projects on the Southeast team, including Moores Creek, a Revolutionary War site. Bob was always positive about John. Years later, I traveled with John to Mid- and North Atlantic project sites and regional meetings. In 1980, we became two of the first-time project managers at the Denver Service Center. We sat next to each other, working for Jerry Patton, covered for each other while traveling and swapping projects. In 1983, we were made permanent PMs. In the late 1980s, when I was PM for New River Gorge National River, John was my supervisor. He also supervised Mike Hunter, who ran the New River Support Office in West Virginia. The three of us were soon dubbed the New River Mafia by John Reynolds, and we did our best to live up to the title. John was always helpful, supportive, and friendly. His later teaching at Colorado State University garnered many admirers, I am sure. A one-of-a-kind U.S. Army tank commander, historian, researcher, and boss. This is from John's friend and collaborator, Randy Cooley. This is just an excerpt from Randy's memory. He sent a rather long remembrance in, and it is available on the website celebratingjohnalbright.blogspot.com. And you can see the whole thing there. In 1984, I was park superintendent at Allegheny Portage Railroad, NHS, and Johnstown Flood National Memorial, when Mr. Murtha called how he could get a national parkway like the Natchez Trace designated and built in western Pennsylvania. I immediately called my friend John at the NPS Denver Service Center and asked how that process was begun. His reply: do a reconnaissance survey of western Pennsylvania roads and sites to see if it's feasible and ask Mr. Murtha for $35,000 and we'll get it done. Out of this humble beginning was born a rewarding collaboration between John, Keith Dunbar, and myself that led to the largest heritage preservation and development effort led by private citizens in the history of the National Park Service. John was the project manager and go-to guy for anything related to DSC organizing, for guidance on historic research and preservation, tracking all project expenditures, and being the historian for what became America's Industrial Heritage Project. The rest of Randy Cooley's tribute may be found on the website celebratingjohnalbright.blogspot.com. And finally, a tribute from Dan Tyler, who is a colleague, again, of John's at CSU. Dear Judy, I am so sorry you lost John. Not having been an active gaffer, I tend to receive important updates late and sporadically. I wish I had written sooner. What a gift we all experienced when John joined the history department, students and faculty alike. I so enjoyed his company. He was across the hall from me and a few doors down. I always marveled at the number of students who waited in line to get a few minutes with him. He was a great guy, humble, funny, witty, but most of all, he had such a wonderful and engaging smile. It attracted people of all ages, and he gave of himself with energy that made us envious. I am so pleased to have known him and to now say that we were colleagues. He enriched all of us and created memories that make me smile. I thank you for sharing him with us, and I wish you strength in these very difficult times. Warmly, Daniel Tyler.
Thank you to Franklin for putting together all of the recordings for us and for sharing those writings. I have one tribute that was also written that I'd like to share. And this is from Chris Jones. And this is to the Albright family. My deepest sympathy on the loss of John to ALS. I worked with John from 1981 to 1990 when we both served on the Eastern team of Denver Service Center. As a young historical architect, John was more than a respected historian and project manager. He was a genuine mentor to the younger professionals like me. He was always engaging and made a special effort to know the cultural resource staff. His guidance was invaluable. He made every day a reward. I'm left with only positive memories of him. And I'm certain he carried that same enthusiasm to CSU and into every classroom. He touched us all with his outgoing nature and love of historical research. The National Park Service family will never forget John. Teaching was his ultimate calling. I feel privileged to have known John for the decade of the 1980s at the Park Service. This is again from Chris Jones. So we are now going to open it up for anyone who would like to say a brief word or two, just a sharing, if there's a memory or something specific that you would like to bring. We're going to keep it on the shorter side. I know we probably all have stories and things that we'd like to share, but in honor of time, if there's something that you would like to share, you have two options. There is down at the bottom of your screen a little box that says, what does it say? It says participants. And I think you could, I don't know if they have the hand raising there. Well, put it this way. You get to raise your hand, literally. Hopefully we can see you if you have your video on. And Julie Legg will also communicate with me and Franklin, but I will be unmuting you so I can call on you. So if you have something that you'd like to share briefly, please put your hand up so that I can see that, we can see that, and give you an opportunity to speak whatever words that are present in your heart.
So Judy, John, and I, quite a few years ago, Judy would have to say how long her memory is better than mine, had dinner parties for people from Unity and gathered people together. I see some nodding heads, yay. And it was just so delightful to have both of them and to spend time getting to know them. So I'm sad that there weren't more people that had the opportunity to do those things. Maybe Judy and I can talk about doing that again someday. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. I first met John in the middle 1970s when my then husband, Doug Scott, and I had been working on Fort Larned and in Kansas. And of course, John immediately took us into his family. We all became friends. It wasn't long before we were sharing Thanksgivings. And then as John's family changed and he met Judy, we had so many years of friendship. We shared family things. We shared history interests. I eventually got divorced and moved to the Denver metro area, where I was fortunate enough to continue to be able to visit back and forth with John and Judy and their family. In the most recent years, I'm sorry that my work schedule has meant I haven't seen as much of them as I had hoped. But my gosh, just having such wonderful memories over those decades, countless stories, so many times sitting on a couch listening to John's stories and his wry humor. I must say, I feel very, very lucky to include him in my family memories. Thank you, and Judy. Yep.
My name's Doreen Beard. I was a student of John's. I met him in 1980. I took his historic preservation graduate course. I had just finished undergraduate at CSU that spring. And meeting him and taking that class was just really just a real guide star for me. I did not want to go into the academy necessarily. I did not want to actively teach in a classroom setting. I ended up going the museum route. I ended up moving to the Pacific Northwest, which was going to be for a lark, you know, for a couple of years. That turned into 30 years. I ended up essentially teaching history in large urban park settings. Worked frequently with National Park Service, Pacific Northwest region people, Parks Canada, of course, because you're so close to British Columbia, and other Alberta, et cetera. I was working in fur trade history for about 30 years before returning to CSU. So John, just at different points, intersected with my career. I hadn't been too long up in the Pacific Northwest when I received a package from him coming through the Pacific Northwest Regional Office for the Park Service. And it was a full set of conservograms, a manual for museums. I still have those. I now work at CSU. They're on my office shelf. And when I heard the news of John's passing, my eyes just kind of flew up to that shelf because I still have the things John sent me, and that would have been in 1983. When I came back to CSU to take a position at the Avenir Museum, which is the historic clothing and textiles collection, somehow John and I reconnected. I remember, of course, seeing him at Mark Gilderhoose's funeral. He then brought in a number of different pieces from his own personal family textile collection that are now in the collection of CSU and the Historic Clothing Textiles collection. So I just feel very blessed that the arc of my career overlapped with his. And I have thought many, many, many times in working with Park Service and Parks Canada historians would make me think of John. And I would also think of him too as such a mentor as students start to come to you over the years and asking you for letters of recommendation. I would always think of John because I would see myself in these young students, and it would just amaze me that I could seem as august to them as he used to seem to me, but I guess that comes to all of us. And again, just thank you for sharing him with us. I know that's often said, but sincerely, thank you. He was quite a person. Thank you.
I volunteered with John. I met John at the Larimer Humane Society, and we volunteered there for 6 years together. And we kind of started an uproar with things at the Larimer Humane Society. So we both left there and we met once a week, every Tuesday morning for coffees at Starbucks, coffee and tea. He was the kindest, had the best ear and the best stories. I miss this man immensely. Such a dear, dear friend. You couldn't ask for a better friend. Such a sweet man. And I cherish having got to know him. Thank you, Judy, for sharing him with so many of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Feel you.
I first met Judy when she came to Fort Collins. I think I didn't realize it, but I guess John had been teaching here for quite a while before she moved up here. And they'd been kind of going back and forth. I got her invited into the American Business Women's Association, and then she's a singer, and so was I, and we've been singing ever since. And in that process, I've met John, and lo and behold, we both moved out to Clydesdale Park subdivision, and we're now neighbors again. We were neighbors in Parkwood for a while, and so John was and my husband had a lot in common because my husband was in the park business too and a teacher at CSU. And so they had good times when we would go out to our neighborhood dinners here. But at the very end here, after John's diagnosis, he and I were singing in the Silvertones senior choir here in Fort Collins, and he was having a hard time driving and getting to chorus. So Judy asked if I would help him. And so I was able to do that gladly, and got to know John a little bit better in his last times. What a man. What a man. He just a stand-up guy, faced this monster that took over his body with a vengeance, and did it with such love for Judy. I was very, very impressed with him. He wasn't able to go very many times, but when he did, one morning he said to me, I've got really good, we really got good news. And that was when the doctor told him he could take his own life. And I thought, boy, that's not very good news, but I guess it was for him. And I just want to send my loving blessings and God's blessings to you. And I'm very privileged to have ever had anything to do with either one of you. I love you both.
I'm Kelly, and I had the great privilege of being a colleague of John's in the history department at Colorado State University. I joined in 1998, and John was such a wonderful colleague and mentor, as are so many of the dear friends I'm seeing on this call, the gaffers and those who have gone before John. Much in my heart today. I remember particularly when I began teaching the wars courses, and John reached out to share with me and guide me and offer his notes, and was always there to help me clear out the details of something that I wanted to bring more fully to the fore. And I also remember on the 9/11 day when everything was shattering around us, and I had a class coming up, and I was so nervous and unsettled, as all of us were. And John invited me into his classroom, and I just sat and watched and marveled at a human being who could reach with such graciousness and calm and care to settle other human beings, to guide those young students in his care. And that has always left an indelible impression on me. And I was fortunate enough to join the gaffers from time to time. John holds a deep place in my heart. I won't forget him. And Judy, he always spoke of you with love and affection, and you are in my heart and prayers as well.
These memories that we've shared, these memories will last forever, as does the love which we continue to share with John and with each other. Today is a commemoration of the gifts that he gave to all of us, and just by being in our lives. Know that to grieve is appropriate, because he has moved beyond our ability to touch, to hold, to talk, and to be with him physically. Yet we know that we are always connected to John through spirit and our memories and the love which never ever dies. We know any grief we may feel for our loss is not for any loss on John's part, because for his life continues to unfold in even greater fullness. And you can be sure he's up there doing something in the other realm, because he's so full of life. I wonder what kind of things he's up to now. I know that he is contributing on the other side. He's watching over us, there's no doubt, and that he's just a freer being as he's left his body. I know that John is doing very well where he is, and the only thing that has changed for him is he's no longer bound by the body and the limitations of the physicality of mind. And so there is a poem that I will read, followed by another poem read by Davine. This one is called Afterglow by Helen Laurie Marshall. And I think this would be John speaking to us. I'd like the memory of me to be a happy one. I'd like to leave an afterglow of smiles when life is done. I'd like to leave an echo whispering softly down the ways of happy times and laughing times and bright and sunny days. I'd like the tears of those who grieve to dry before the sun of happy memories that I leave when this life is done. And Reverend Davine.
This one that I'm reading is called To My Old Brown Earth by Pete Seeger, and I understand it was one of John's favorites. To my old brown earth and my old blue sky, I'll now give these last few molecules of I. And you who sing and you who stand nearby, I do not charge you not to cry. Guard well our human chain. Watch well you keep it strong. As long as sun will shine and this home keep pure and sweet and green. For now I'm yours and you are also mine.
Thank you, Davine. So the truth is, we need not grieve too long for John. Miss him? Yes. But know that he has been released from a body that was no longer able to serve him. I'm so grateful that we live in Colorado, which does respect the dignity and the rights of those that are ready to release their bodies. I'm so grateful for that. And I know he is as well. We now see John in the fullness of the life that continues beyond that which we call death, yet we know it's a transition. And we will always remember him. And I have a poem that I'm going to read called We Remember Him. And you're going to still be muted. However, I would invite you to repeat the line, We Remember Him. So I will read a line and then I will open it up and we will all say together, We Remember Him. So you might just put your hand on your heart. We remember him. In the rising of the sun and its going down, we remember him. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember him. In the opening buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember him. In the blueness of the sky and in the warmth of summer, we remember him. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember him. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we will remember him. When we are weary and in need of strength, we will remember him. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember him. When we have joys we yearn to share, we remember him. So as long as we live, he too shall live, for he is always a part of us as we remember him. And so let us just put again, keeping your hands upon your heart. I'd like you to maybe close your eyes if you wish. Just breathe in love. We breathe out love to one another. Imagining the air that we breathe in is pure love. We just breathe that in. And we breathe out the love. And as we continue to breathe, we understand that spirit is the breath that is breathing us. While we are in our bodies, we are being breathed by love. When we release our bodies, we are breathed out of our bodies as love. For the only thing that remains that is forever, a constant, the power and presence that is pure love, energy that is everywhere present. It's in each and every one of us. It's in the love that we shared and continue to share with our beloved John, knowing that he is loving us back with his breath, his presence. We can feel him now, smiling, laughing with that smile that he has, and just being in the love. We are breathing with him, and he is breathing with us on the other side of the veil. So we give thanks for this blessing, for this technology, for this opportunity to celebrate the magnificent being known as John Albright. We are blessed by his presence. We are blessed by his love, his laughter. We are blessed by all the memories that we carry and continue to share with one another. For as long as we live and beyond, we shall remember him, and he lives on within us. And so we let this word go, and we take a breath in, and we let go in love and joy and gratitude. And if you care to anchor that with me, say with me, and so it is. Amen. And that's what we need. And so thank you. We bless you. Stay safe and know that you're loved.